newsroom at 8 o'clock. The Prime Minister has welcomed what he's called a clear and definitive decision on a second Scottish independence referendum. The Supreme Court has ruled the vote can't be held without Westminster's permission. SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, has told LBC he's determined to make it happen.
There are obviously rallies, demonstrations taking place throughout Scotland tonight. And in the end, it's the people that will determine this. I want support for independence to increase. I want to build a consensus. I want to build people from the other side. Listen to those that have been on the no side and build this yes majority. Westminster can't keep saying no. It's not a tenable position.
The Home Secretary has admitted most asylum seekers would need to arrive in the UK before being able to submit a claim. Suella Braverman was appearing in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee earlier. A senior lawyer will investigate 2 formal claims of bullying made against the Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic Raab says he's confident he will have acted professionally. Japan has produced another shock at the World Cup, beating Germany 2-1 in their Group E opener in Qatar. Earlier, Morocco's game against 2018 runners-up Croatia ended goalless. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 12 points at 74.65. The pound buys $1.20 and €1.16. LBC weather: showers continuing in the north and west overnight, a low of 2. The rain will move eastwards tomorrow, a mixture of sunny spells and blustery showers later, a high of 13 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. 0345 6060 973, of course, is the number you need if you want to take part in the show and ask our panel a question. You can text 84850 and you can even use Alexa. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC and then just say your question. It really is as simple as that. And you can watch our proceedings on Global Player. And why wouldn't you? Because we have a great panel for you this evening. We have Flick Drummond, the Conservative MP for Meon Valley. Steve Richards, broadcaster, author and host of the Rock and Roll Politics podcast, which you can find on Global Player. Lance Forman is managing director of smoked salmon producer H. Forman Sons and a former MEP for the Brexit Party and later the Conservatives. I think, Lance, you are the Nigel Farage of our programme, in that I think you've probably been on more than anybody else over the course of the last few years.
I'm not sure whether to take that as a compliment or not.
Take it as a compliment. And Caroline Russell is Green Party member of both the London Assembly and Islington Council. She's making her debut on the programme tonight. Welcome to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much.
And we are looking forward to your questions.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And our first correction of the night comes from Candice from Cheshire, who says it's actually H. Forman Son, not Sons. Is that right?
It is right, actually.
The producer will be sacked.
Well done.
Right, let's go to our first call. It's Eric in Glasgow. Eric, hello. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, Iain.
Hi. What would you like to say?
I just missed Mr. Blackford's little spiel there. I'm quite worried. I'm an ex-British Army soldier, and I would like to put to the panel, although they might not be their forte, that what's going to happen to United Kingdom's military, and under the current circumstances of how the world is working, let's be charitable here. Britain is on its knees when it comes to defence. What's going to happen with Scotland and the way that the United Kingdom, the British Army, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, how's this going to pan out, and how's it going to look to the rest of the world if this happens?
Well, and our nuclear deterrent, I guess. This is on the back of, if you just tuned in, we had Ian Blackford on in the last hour talking about the Supreme Court decision today, which essentially says, well, you can't have a referendum until the Westminster Parliament agrees to one. Now, anybody got any Scottish blood in them on the panel, apart from me? Because I don't want to answer the question. Caroline, go ahead. That'll teach you to put your hand up.
I certainly will. My dad was a Scot. It is, the Greens believe in self-determination. We believe that our sister party, the Scottish Greens, are the people who should be sounding off about this rather than politicians here in London. And I think I can absolutely understand why people want to have another referendum because of all the things that have happened since 2014 when the last referendum happened. And in particular, Brexit, which, people in Scotland didn't vote for it. And so I can completely understand why they'd like to have a referendum and work out what to do. In terms of what happens with the military, I did not get into green politics to get into the nuances of detail around military budgets, military spending and organisation. So I'm afraid I'm not the right person to answer that question.
Well, it is an important question, isn't it? Because if you can't defend the country, you might not have a country at all. So I'd have thought any politician, regardless of their politics, ought to be interested in the defence of the realm.
Absolutely interested in the defence of the realm, but and in peacekeeping. The army has an incredible role in peacekeeping, but it's but if the Scottish people get to have a referendum, if they vote to separate from the UK, then of course there would have to be all of the processes and organisational decisions would need to be worked out and made, and that would be part of a process. No one's saying, just throw all the cards up in the air, and I hope they make a better job of it than people have made of Brexit.
Oof. Flick Drummond.
Well, firstly, Eric, thank you very much for your service. I'm sure you've probably seen quite a few battles in your time in the armed forces. We are carrying on putting 2% of GDP into the armed forces. We've got a huge programme ahead. So our UK Defence Force is certainly well funded, and it's going to do well. I think this is a question you really need to ask Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP.
Here.
She's not here, exactly. But I don't know what they are thinking about militarily. Doesn't make sense to me at all.
We know that they don't want the nuclear deterrent based in Scotland, don't we? Yeah,
but we're talking about the armed forces generally. I suspect that's what Eric's worried about. So, to me, it's a no-starter. They had a chance in 2014 to have a referendum. It didn't go their way. They can't keep having, more and more referendums.
But Caroline's right, isn't she, that the circumstances have changed. And yes, it was supposed to be a once-in-a-generation referendum. I'm never quite sure how long a generation is, but...
It's not 8 years or whatever it has.
No, but... Brexit was only a flicker in Lance's eye in 2014, wasn't it?
Well, yes. It was in our manifesto in 2015 and obviously what happened in 2016. But I think as far as defence goes, it's really important that the United Kingdom stays together, and we really value our Scottish forces as well as the Welsh and Northern Ireland as well.
How long do you think that the Westminster government can continue to deny Scotland a referendum when they've had 8 elections since that referendum in 2014, and each time the SNP has won those elections in some shape or form?
Well, they're going to make it as part of their policy in the next general election, and they're going to make it very much geared on to a referendum. The polls say that they are not going to get what they want, so we will see at the next general election. They may well lose a lot of seats.
But if they get 51% of the vote, well, let's say they get 52% in the next general election, and they sweep the board in terms of seats, which is, they've virtually done it anyway. How can a Westminster government then justifiably say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do it? Because Ian Blackford said to me within the last hour, they wouldn't regard that as permission to have another referendum. They would regard that as the vote on independence.
Well, this is totally hypothetical at the moment, but they, as I say, they lost last time, and the polls suggest that they might lose that in the next vote too. So I think we must carry on being a United Kingdom and really concentrate on the issues that matter to all of us.
Steve Richards, you go to the Edinburgh Fringe, as I do each year. I don't know how interested you are in this issue, but let's address Eric's question first. What would be the military consequences of going independent?
I'll answer that very precisely, but beforehand, there is the leap that you need, the barrier that you get over first, which is whether there's going to be another referendum. And I loathe referendums. I would prefer there not to be another ever. But I think, as your question, Ian, suggested, there will have to be. This dance will continue until there is one, because Nicola Sturgeon is given an ace every time there appears to be a new obstacle to having one. So I think there will have to be one, probably quite soon, and not before the next general election, but within years. However, I don't think we should have any more of these fantasy referendums where it's the status quo versus paradise. The negotiation has to be done before the referendum. So issues such as what happens to the military will have to be resolved before the referendum. No more referendums of, this status quo.
How would that work, though? Because you wouldn't be able to have the SNP government negotiating with the Ministry of Defence before a referendum. That's just impossible.
There would have to be a negotiation as to what, in a quite detailed way, what form the independence would take. Now, it would be very difficult, but a lot easier than another referendum fought on their vague definition of what form independence would take versus this nasty Westminster status quo. Because that, who knows, but I suspect they would win that. But when a referendum is on a really detailed set of outcomes, I think that becomes much more interesting. It'll be tricky, but I think you have to do it first. And I think, incidentally, with Brexit, if that had happened, that would have been in a completely different place.
Lance Forman, you presumably are fully in favour of a Scottish independence referendum, given that you wanted a Brexit referendum.
Well, I'm not anti-referenda. I know we've been talking a bit recently about Switzerland. And in Switzerland, they have referenda all the time, actually. And, if you believe in democracy, asking people what they think is probably not a bad idea. I think it would be hypocritical of anyone that supported the referendum on Brexit not to support a referendum in Scotland. However, if there are terms to a referendum, you have to adhere to them. And the terms of the last one were that you're going to get this one, and that's it for a generation. You can't keep asking the same question until you get the answer you want. Because if we had another referendum in Scotland now, why not have a further one 2 years later and see if people are happy with what You've got to accept the terms of the referendum at the time, and it was agreed that it would be once in a generation, and I think that's what we need to stick to. There are lots of uncertainties around what would happen if Scotland did go off, became independent. Military is one, currency is another. They were talking about would they have to join the euro if they wanted to then join the EU. I think the EU have said they might not want them to join, so that would be a little bit complicated. If they had their own currency, I suspect it would devalue. Cheaper salmon in the UK, brilliant. I think there are a lot of... How much of
your salmon comes from Scotland?
I beg your pardon?
How much of your salmon comes from Scotland?
99% of it.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's the best salmon in the world.
Think of the tariffs, though, afterwards.
Well, I think they'd be shooting themselves in the feet if they did that. But no, I think that... in fact, there is something else that hopefully will come up later in the show. But there's been some polling on whether we should have a referendum on net zero. So if anyone asks a question on that subject, I've got some really interesting news. It's literally. I
can almost guarantee that they won't, but you have encouraged them to do so.
There's some really interesting news that no one will have heard yet.
Okay, the military, how would that be affected? That's what Eric wants to know.
Yeah, I'm not a military expert. I wouldn't want to sort of claim to have any expertise in that area at all. So, I think it'd be unfair for me to comment. But
that's the only time that you're going to agree with Caroline on anything during the course of the show, I suspect.
Not necessotally, but possibly.
We'll find out.
The point that you raised about the currency, I think, is a really interesting one, because Ian Blackford, he seemed to think that Scotland would just automatically keep using the pound. But as I understand it, you can't join the EU unless you have your own central bank, which means your own currency.
And also, they might not be allowed to keep the pound. I mean, in the last referendum, we had both the Chancellor at the time, George Osborne, and the Shadow Chancellor at the time, Ed Balls, saying they would not be allowed to keep the pound if they went for independence. I think there was even a controversial UK Treasury white paper making the same.
But you can't stop people from using a currency, can you? You just use it. It's just not the official currency.
It's just not the official one, no. But I mean, you see, this is why, if there is to be a referendum, and I I think there will have to be one. Although it won't resolve, referendums never resolve anything. You just carry on debating forever. But these things will have to be resolved in advance. And there will have to be a negotiation. And the nature of how they use a currency will have to be absolutely clearly in front of the electorate in advance of the referendum, not afterwards. So I think that's the only way it can go ahead. But they can't just say, oh, yeah, we'll use that currency. And then, oh, yeah, we'll rejoin the European Union. Everything has to be clear. Does that mean in the end they'll take the euro? If so, when? With what implications? All need to be sorted out first. Then you have a debate over what that looks like and a vote.
Right, Eric, I'm not quite sure you got the answers you were looking for there, but we all did our best. Thank you very much indeed for your question. We'll come to a few other subjects in just a few moments' time. It's 8:15.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's It's 19 minutes past 8 on LBC. 0345 6060973 if you'd like to ask our cross-question panel a question. We have Conservative MP Flick Drummond, Steve Richards, broadcaster, author and host of the Rock and Roll Politics podcast. Now, just in 30 seconds, give us an elevator pitch for the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it kind of tries to step back and make sense of the wild political times we're in. It arose from a one-person show I do about politics, taking people behind the scenes. And it's just become a weekly thing. It's got a lot bigger, and the listeners are very engaged because they raise points, make brilliant questions and things. And it's every week, and it began just as a sort of hobby with me in my room recording kind of reflections. But I've become increasingly committed to it and the people who tune in. So, yeah.
And it's just you don't have guests.
I think it's unique in that sense. It is just me, but I hope there's a sense of
I hate to burst your bubble because, Steve, you know that it's not unique because For the Many podcast generally doesn't have guests either, apart from the live ones.
No, but there are two of you.
That is true.
So you are two.
All right. Split hairs.
And I occasionally do interviews as well, but it's mainly kind of me.
And do you script it at all?
No.
That's quite a talent, I think.
I like talking without notes, actually, because I think it's, as long as it's structured, I think it is in a way a closer way of engaging with this very intimate medium, the sound, radio, podcast.
Do you get questions coming in during it, or you just carry on talking?
No, because it's not live. But it goes out very quickly, frankly, because it's very easy to edit. It's just
and we have Lance Forman with us, Smoked Salmon producer for Forman Son and former Brexit Party MEP, and Caroline Russell as Green Party member of both the London Assembly and Islington Council. I'm going to ask you a little bit about that after the next break, but let's go to another question. It's a text question from John in Somerset. Out of 10, could the panel please rate Suella Braverman's performance in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee today? Well, if you were listening in the last hour, you'll have heard me interviewing Tim Lawton, who quizzed Suella Braverman on safe routes. And it didn't go well for the Home Secretary. She didn't seem to have an answer. Flick Drummond, she hasn't had a stellar start to her second stint as Home Secretary, has she?
Well, I sadly missed that bit. I've been busy all day. But it is one of the most difficult jobs in government, particularly at the moment. She hasn't been there very long, but we do have to get a grip on immigration, and that should be at the top of her desk, her in tray. On safe routes, I think it was about Tim was role-playing or something, wasn't he?
Well, he was saying he was a 16-year-old from Africa and had got a sibling in this country. What's the safe route to come to this country? And, of course, the answer is there isn't one.
Well, no, there is one, because there's a relative here. He could come through on the relative's visa. Yeah, so he could have easily done that. But she should have known that as well. So he could have asked, if you've got a relative here and you've got a case like that, you can put your name forward and get on the plane, and you'd be over here quite quickly. So that is, she should have known that perhaps. But, I'm really pleased that she's started working with the French now, which is great, getting more border patrol into place. But the real thing, of course, is trying to stop the human trafficking. And that's the worst bit about this whole thing, because families are spending huge amounts of money to try and get their relations over here. And it's just devastating. And now we're sending them back, so they've wasted a huge amounts of money. And I think that needs to be more publicised. We need to return people quicker. The whole system needs to be made quicker. I think we've got 122,000 people are waiting to get some.
And do you know how many were processed in the last 12 months?
Not very many.
4,000.
Yeah.
So, if you think about that,
shocking.
how long that list will take to get down to...
They've doubled the number of visa agents here, but they need to be trained as well, and it is just not fit for purpose at the moment. So that's got to be at the top of her agenda.
Just remind us who's been in government for the last 12 and a half years.
Yeah,
because you can't blame that on anyone else. But
no, but the immigration has gone up. Up and up and up. We had, I think I've got the figures here somewhere. So we had in 2018 there were about 30,000. And now 2019 56,000, 21 70,000, and now
70,000 what?
People waiting on the list. So we've just had more and more people coming in. So it's something we've got to get a grip on it very quickly. But that's the point, isn't it?
This is not something that's come out of the blue. This is something that's been going on for years, and the government have done nothing to try and make it better.
Well, this is what Suella's got to get a grip on then. Yeah.
But I mean, when you hear Yvette Cooper saying, well, they've had all of this time, it is a legitimate argument. And maybe it's time after 13 years to maybe give her a chance.
I think we will start working on this. We have recruited more people, and so I'm fairly optimistic we can get a handle on it quickly.
Lance Forman.
Well, I think on that point alone, it's not as though Labour have wanted to slow down the immigration to this country, so I don't think that's necessarily a particularly strong argument. People automatically assume if you're a Brexit supporter, you're anti-immigration, and I've never been anti-immigration. I am a child of immigrants. My great-grandfather on my mum's side that came here started our business, fled the pogroms of Ukraine. My dad, in fact, was a Holocaust survivor, came over as a child after the war. He was in a Siberian prison camp. His parents waved him goodbye in Poland with his younger sister at the age of 10. Never know if they'd see them again. Very similar to sort of stories you're seeing today. So I don't have a problem with immigration, certainly not for asylum seekers, and actually not even for economic migrants. If people want to better themselves, you tend to find that people that do emigrate tend not to be, people assume they must be, lazy and looking for, handouts. So lazy people don't generally travel across the world to try and find somewhere to live. They're people that are generally quite aspirational and want to better themselves. But of course the difference between then and now is that back then there were no benefits, and now everything is given to you. So there is there is no positive inducement. And what we do need to sort out is, we need to sort out the real cases, whether they are, asylum seekers or economic migrants, or people coming here for all the wrong sort of reasons. And that I think is the challenge. It's a management issue as much as anything else. I've used an example in the past before where, we don't have it anymore. You had a restaurant. It only seated 70 people. If 200 people came to the restaurant one night, we wouldn't hate the ones that couldn't get in because there were too many people. We'd love them. They want to come to our place. Problem is, we've only got 70 seats. So how do you solve that problem? You can either, give everybody bad service and squeeze everybody in, but then no one's happy, or you can build another restaurant, but you can't do that overnight. So I think these are long-term issues that we need to sort out, and we just have to be practical about it, and obviously keep out the people that are coming here for all the wrong reasons.
Caroline Russell.
Well, I think the questioner was asking how we'd rate Suella Braverman's
which neither of you have actually done so far.
Performance
I'll come
today.
back to you on that.
And I was actually going to give her 10 out of 10 for honesty, because basically what Tim Lawton revealed was you could see Suella realising as the clip sort of rolls on that, it is very difficult for people to get here and to claim asylum until they step foot in the UK. And so the policies that Suella Braverman is espousing are actually driving the small boat traffic and incentivising it. And we've got to go back to the beginning. We've got to start thinking about people as people, and not as a problem. We do have a need for more people in our country to keep our, to contribute to our society, and these people who come actually. Can I agree with you, Lance? People who come here second time.
This is what this programme is all about.
This is bizarre. I was expecting to completely differ from you, but it's really important to think, to remember people are not coming here to take from us, they're coming to contribute. And that is, it's really, really important that we think about that and that we just have some humanity. So if I was going to be rating Suella Braverman for humanity, I would give her a 0 or a 1 out of 10. But in terms of her honesty, as that clip went on, I'd give her 10.
Lance, you're rating out of 10 because John will be disappointed if we don't all do that.
Well, I'd probably give her 7 or 8. I mean, she's Perhaps she should have known her stuff.
you're
She
feeling
hadn't done her
generous
homework.
today.
But one thing I would also say is that in the year to June this year, 1.1 million visas have been granted to people to come to the UK. That is a record for any year. It's not as though we're not a welcoming country. People are coming here. So, we mustn't get this idea that we're all nasty, horrible people that don't like
that. That covers a huge number of people in terms of students.
It covers students too, but that's still
people who come to
1.1
work
million people is a
temporarily.
lot of people to come
sure.
to the country.
Flick, marks out of 10.
Well, I didn't see it, so I can't really rate it. But I assume that, she got a 10 out of 10 because I would have to be loyal.
Steve Rich.
I don't, I always think when people are piling in on a politician, is everyone just joining a kind of fashionable thing? And you have to sort of step back a bit and wonder. So I'm going to give a 1 out of 10. I'm going to join the pilot. And for this reason, see, I think Flick gave a better answer to the issue than she did. And I'm genuinely baffled as to why that is. She's a lawyer. She should be, at the very least, whatever you think of her views, someone who can master detail. But Tim Lawton seemed to know more about what was going on than she did. And I'm genuinely don't understand it. She's in that Home Office all the time. She should surely be able to at least give the impression of mastering detail. And she didn't. And that is terrible for a Home Secretary responsible for this around the clock. She didn't, as you did, name one example of a safe route very authoritatively, and then say, look, it's not good enough. We're going to do more now. Here is what we're going to do. That's the way you deal with these Home Affairs committees, not least when you're being interrogated by somebody from your own side. So I'm sorry, I'm joining the pilot. 1 out of 10.
Well, we've had marks ranging from 1 to 10. So
I get you 10 out of 10 for honesty, very specifically.
You did say it, Karen. This is going to go
1 out of
viral
10
now. Green
in
Party
general.
Assembly member gives Suella Braverman 10 out of 10.
Got a story. Yeah.
We will come back to more questions in just a moment. Lines are still open, of course, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31 news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
The SNP's Westminster leader says he's determined to hold another Scottish independence referendum despite the Supreme Court ruling they'd need the UK government's consent to do so. Ian Blackford has told LBC in the end it's the people who will decide. The Home Secretary has said most asylum seekers would need to arrive in the UK before being able to submit a claim. Suella Braverman's made the admission after being challenged by Conservative MP Tim Lawton during a Home Affairs Select Committee meeting earlier. A senior lawyer will investigate 2 formal claims of bullying made against the Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic Raab says he's confident he'll have acted professionally. LBC weather, showers continuing in the north and west overnight, a low of 2. Rain moving east tomorrow, a mix of sunny spells and blustery showers later on, a high of 13 degrees.
LBC.
Jen
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Flick Drummond, Steve Richards, Lance Forman and Caroline Russell here answering your calls. Just before we go to the next one, though, Caroline, you are on the Greater London Assembly and on Islington Council. Now, two similar but different roles. What are the differences in being a GLA member and a councillor?
OK, so as a local councillor, you are elected to represent people in a small patch of a borough, and you have casework where people come to you with issues, and it's very, very hyper local. So you really get to hear what matters to Londoners and what they need help with. On the London Assembly, my role is to check the Mayor of London is doing a good job. Now, sometimes those two roles.
Some people would say that's a full-time job.
It is a full-time job. I'm like many backbench councillors. I'm a councillor in my evenings and my weekends, and I'm a London Assembly member by day. But there's one example which actually relates to something that's been in the news a lot recently, which is the issue of mould in people's flats. Now, I saw that as casework coming through, seeing. There were no solutions. No one had any solutions. And some of the way people were treated, they were told to put a lid on their pan when they were cooking. They were told not to take very long showers. They were basically being told not to live in their flats. And so I took that to the London Assembly, and I was chair of the Environment Committee. We did a report called Keeping Out the Chill about mould and condensation, which looked at a project in Thamesmead, which has actually tackled those buildings that just by the very construction of the building, then if you just live in that building and breathe, you will create condensation and mould. But there are ways to fix them, but it's not well known, and people aren't doing enough of it.
I didn't see a conversation about mould coming on.
Well, there you go.
But anyway, let's go to another question. It's from Margaret in Durham. Hello, Margaret.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
All right, thank you. What would you like to say?
What I'd like to put to the panel is this, and you can be more precise than me, but I gather we have between 3 and 5 million children in this country living in poverty. We are constantly told we are the 5th, now we're the 6th richest country in the world. What a shame on us. It took a footballer to get them some free school meals. What are we doing about this? And we all know what sort of winter we're going to have. We're all going to have to suffer a bit. But these little people will be short of food, maybe warmth, but most of all, they'll be short of hope or aspiration. And we've got to do something to help not a couple of hundred, but millions of our children. What do the panel recommend we do?
Steve Richards.
It's a huge question. We should carry on for about 2 hours to address some of these issues. But I think most fundamentally of all is there has been an acceptance over many years, actually, that public provision in Britain, compared with many equivalent countries, you mentioned Britain is the fifth or sixth strongest economy, has just been in a kind of constant decline. So some of the ways you deal with the fundamentals, obviously you've got the short-term thing. You mentioned Marcus Rashford and school meals. Obviously that's one of the many short-term measures. But the longer-term measures are better training, pathways to work, talking about the parents of the children, better public provision in terms of transport, the way you educate. I mean, these are huge, huge issues. But the child poverty is to do with parental poverty, housing, which we mentioned briefly a few moments ago. I mean, I'm afraid these are the fundamental issues that need to be addressed, and it needs much more ambitious sense of what government can do in the public realm and to provide pathways to work which are not just sort of kind of phrases, but real, based on better training and a matching of the demands of work and people and so on. That, in the end, is how you deal with it. But in the short term, you are dealing with Marcus Rashford-style school meal initiatives and helping people get through this dark winter.
Do you believe that there really are, according to the figures, there are 14.5 million people living in poverty in the UK, according to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. That includes 4.3 million children. Now, this is where, do we not have to differentiate between relative poverty and absolute poverty? Because I think when you use the word poverty, people are imagining that children aren't being clothed, they haven't got shoes, they're not being fed properly. But actually, and I'd love to know how many of those 4.3 million are in absolute poverty.
Yeah.
I suspect I'd still be horrified by the number.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be 4.3 million. No, that number is huge, and that is not the number who have not got any clothes or have to head for a food bank every day of the year. But you would still be shocked by the figure. Yeah. But you're right. The definitions are a bit imprecise.
Lance Forman.
Well, no child should live in poverty. It's not their choice. It's not any of their decisions that led to that situation. But you're going to continually have this problem unless you have a successful, thriving economy. You've got to get the economy going to bring people out of poverty. And, I looked at Jeremy Hunt at the last his budget, his financial statement, and you looked at him and you thought, this is like the CEO of a charity. All he was doing was handing out money here, handing out money there, saying these people need more money, these people. There was nothing in there about how you stimulate the economy, how you get the economy going again, how you get the private sector going again. And until you do that, it's only through business growth that you can actually create the jobs, the taxes that pay for all the public services we need. And there was nothing in there on that at all. Another challenge we have at the moment is the incentive to go to work. Before COVID, there were 3 million people on universal credit. There are now nearly double that. I think it's 5.8 million people on universal credit. The average wage in London is about £30,000. Not the minimum, the average wage is about £30,000 a year. After tax, that's about £23,000. As a single parent with a child, you can get £23,000 on universal credit. Why would you bother going to work? So there are all these questions that need to be worked out. I just think we need an economy where there's aspiration, there's hope. You need to stimulate, you need to incentivise business.
But isn't it also at policy choices where government has this pot of money to spend?
Yes,
and it could decide to spend an extra 20 billion to alleviate child poverty, but it chooses not to.
Well, there are short-term policy choices, and absolutely, it could choose to do that, and to some extent, it should do that because children should not be in poverty. But it needs to sort out the longer-term problems. So it needs to sort out the economy. It needs to sort out some major supply-side issues. Housing, massive issue. We should have been doing this 15, 20 years ago. I just don't know, we need to build more homes to bring the price of housing down so the cost of living is lower and people have more disposable income. Energy. It's ridiculous that we haven't had a sensible... Bless you.
I think I've only ever sneezed once on air in 12 and a half years. So. But
we've the energy crisis, we should not be in this situation where, we could be independent on energy. If we were fracking like the Americans, we wouldn't have... The Americans have done it. We should have been doing this 10 years ago. We would not have the crisis.
Great song, Frack Like an American. Well, Caroline.
Well, I think, first of all, we have to remember that people in poverty are very often in work and they are being paid very, very low wages. And it is an absolute disgrace. We should be paying, the minimum wage should be at least £15 an hour for people to be able to live a decent life. And there are choices, there are political choices that are being made, and we have witnessed over the last 12 years austerity budgeting so that the safety net to support the families living in poverty, bringing up children in poverty, the safety net is so shredded now, and that is something that I see as a local councillor. I go into people's flats, the ceiling looks as if it's got bubble wrap on it, and it is condensation on the ceiling, bubbles of condensation on the ceiling. Those children are woken up in the night by condensation droplets falling on their head. They are growing up breathing mould. It is.
Are they council houses?
They are council
So
and
you're
housing
council that
and
you run.
housing associate. I don't run. I'm a single opposite. I was single opposition councillor, but it's no. The Labour and Conservatives both have some responsibility for homes being insulated but without proper ventilation being put in, and that is a huge job that needs to happen. But we've heard a discussion about, is it really 4.3 million children in poverty? These are children who are going to school without enough having had breakfast. There are teachers who are having to take food into school. There are parents who are in work who don't take a sick note because they don't dare have any time off work. If you talk to the people that are experiencing this, you would know that we need to have some really urgent action, and we need to make sure that the big companies that are paying poverty wages, that are asset stripping, loading companies up with debt, that is no way to run a country.
OK, let's go to Flick.
Well, you are sort of correct that it's people in work, mostly on universal credit, and it's work progression that we really need to focus on. We have put the living wage up, of course, but the best way for children to get out of poverty is by education. We now have more good and outstanding schools around the country. We've just put another 2.3 billion into the schools, and that's the best way of getting out of poverty. But we also have over 1 million vacancies, so there's absolutely no excuse for anybody not to go out to work and earn a wage. Yep. But we've got to make sure that there's enough time and they can do that. So we've got childcare issues as well, and that's one of the biggest issues that keeping people from working, working the right hours, the 40 hours that they might need to have a proper wage. So that's something very much that the government's focusing on at the moment.
Do you regret now that the coalition government effectively cut Sure Start down to a bare minimum? Because that did have an effect on people.
It was one of the best things that the Labour government did. I will give them all credit for that. Sure Start was excellent. We've replaced it with the Troubled Families Initiative and various other things as well. We've also got the Holiday Activities Fund, which helps children through the summer holiday and the winter holidays, every holiday at the moment. And that's funded through schools. We give the money to the councils, and that's the councils how they deliver it. In Hampshire, for instance, they deliver it through the schools because the teachers know the families that need it most of all. So we are giving huge amounts of money out. But, people make choices. There's political choices and also personal choices. OK, well, I'm going to make a choice and wrap that discussion up because we've got a couple more questions which I want to fit in before we finish at 9. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Right, I'm going to ask for shorter answers so we can fit in more questions just before we finish. We have Flick Drummond, Steve Richards, Lance Forman and Caroline Russell with us. Text question from Stephen in Lewisham. Should Rishi Sunak channel Margaret Thatcher and tell the unions where to go? Just rejoice at that question, Flick Drummond.
Thank you, Iain. Yes, and yes, he has to. I mean, the unions are holding us all to hostage just when we need to get the country going. It means that people won't be able to get to work. It means people won't be able to get their Christmas presents. This is not the time to start going on strike. We need to work hard, all of us, and get this country to become more productive. I mean, we will get inflation down next year and mortgages will go down. But at the moment, we're going through a huge global issue at the moment. That's what's causing all of this. It's not just the government's fault. And we will need to get together and make sure we come out of this well.
So you accept that it is partially the government's fault?
No. I mean,
you just said it's not just the government's fault.
Well, okay, so people blame the government, but it's not. If you look at every other country, they're also going through exactly the same inflation and mortgages and the same issues. So it's not the government's fault, which is what people are starting to, think that they blame us for.
Caroline.
Well, Rishi Sunak needs to show some humility, and I think taking a Margaret Thatcher line would be disastrous for him. We've had this kind of extraordinary succession of prime ministers. The last one had her mini budget, which has been absolutely catastrophic. And absolutely, I understand why people are going on strike at the moment. And it's not just the railways, it's the nurses as well. People are facing a cost of living crisis like nothing we've seen for years. They're facing rocketing energy bills, rising mortgages if they've got a mortgage, rising rents, rising food prices, and people have an absolute right to stand up for decent, fair pay and decent working conditions. And I think Rishi Sunak should, as I say, show some humility.
Give in to them. That's what you're saying, aren't you?
I think he should absolutely be talking to the unions and making sure that that people who are, people doing these jobs like, driving trains, you're responsible for people's lives. We're all reliant on trains. You're responsible for, you're actually, it's a really skilled job. It's really important. The people
and train drivers are paid well. But I keep having to remind people.
But so are MPs and journalists.
The RMT is not a train drivers union. There are train drivers who are in it, but ASLEF is the main train drivers union, and the RMT is full of cleaners, full of guards, full of ticket office staff. So yes, they are not paid as well as train drivers are. But I think if you're using train drivers as an example, that's possibly not the best one to use.
Well, fair enough. But look, everyone, whether you're a nurse, whether you're working in the NHS, everyone is hurting at the moment. And if Rishi Sunak doesn't understand how much people are hurting financially at the moment, then he's going to find himself in trouble.
Lance?
If Rishi Sunak channeled anything Margaret Thatcher at the moment, I would be absolutely overjoyed. I mean, he did 2 U-turns on his first day as Prime Minister on the bonfire of EU rules and on fracking. Margaret Thatcher, I don't believe, ever U-turned on anything, so I'd love him...
not strictly true, but
I'd love him not to... we want a bit of Thatcherism in the government.
But she was much more of a pragmatist than people seem to remember. I mean, she revelled in this conviction politician image, but she was actually a pragmatist on most things.
She had principles that she set out very clearly, and people understood those principles, and that's why, and I think that's what's severely lacking in politics today. There's too much pragmatism and not enough belief in a method which people can buy into. In terms of striking, I think it'd be very selfish of the unions, given the mess we're all in, given the handouts that everybody had during COVID. I'm an employer, and when you're an employer, and we're a small business, we employ 50 people, but on average, our staff have been with us for over 13 years. And what you learn about employing people is that if you treat them well, they're good for the business. And you can pay them well because the business does better.
Yeah.
If I had staff saying, oh, I'm not coming to work because I had to walk too far this day, or, it's too cold in the factory, I just wouldn't employ it. I'd just say, sorry, but you're not going to work here. If these people don't like it, don't go on strike. There are 1 million vacancies out there. Get another job. There's plenty of jobs around. Get another job.
I would look at your Twitter feed later, Lance, after that. Steve?
See, there's a sort of mythological Thatcher and the real Thatcher. I'm writing a book at the moment. It's a chapter about post-79. She, although obsessed by getting inflation down, agreed all the public sector pay deals early on because she felt too weak to take the unions on. And in the early confrontation with the miners, she gave in. And if I were Sunak at the moment, I would look at that rather than the confrontation with the miners mid-80s, because the range of unions contemplating strike action, if they all go ahead, and we already know the scale of disruption with the trains, the winter of discontent will look like a tea party. The winter of discontent was really kind of unofficial strikes in regions that caused all the bins to overflow.
Right, I'm going to have to bring you to a conclusion because we're nearly out of time, but I want to get a final text question in from Debbie in Mansfield. I'm sure your panel are as excited as I am that there's a Love Actually reunion coming this year. I didn't know that. I know it's a bit early, but what are your panellists' favourite Christmas films? Lance.
Well, I was going to hold it up on
Very good.
But my paper's not clear. We all love all those old movies, don't we? But I'm more interested this Christmas in what's going to happen with the King's speech. We're not going to have the Queen sitting down.
Well, come on, answer the question. What's your favourite Christmas film?
I just love all those old movies. The old, White Christmas,
right,
High Society.
It has to be The Snowman. It always makes me cry.
Okay, Flick.
Do I have to do Christmas ones? I like to watch Mamma Mia, and when it's horribly cold and it makes you feel nice and warm.
Steve?
It's easy for me. I like Love Actually. I really enjoy it. I just love it. The images of London and
Particularly
Rowan.
the bit where he tells the American president where to go. I like that.
That's a good bit.
But none of you have said the best one, The Sound of Music. How could you have overlooked that? But there we go. Right, thank you very much to all of you for taking part tonight. Flick Drummond, Steve Richards, Lance Forman and Caroline Russell. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking about gambling, particularly online gambling, because it's causing a surge in suicides among young men turning to A&E, according to bosses at the NHS. A 42% annual rise in demand for NHS gambling clinics has resulted in the health service needing to open another 2 facilities in England to cope. Are you a gambling addict? Are you addicted to online gambling? Has the issue got worse for you? If you've managed to conquer your gambling addiction, we want to know how and why and how you did it. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The Home Secretary has admitted the government has failed to control its borders, but Suella Braverman blamed migrants crossing the channel for overcrowding at the Manston process.